Integral Theories, Philosophies and Practices, a deeper dive, part 4. So we explored the triune or tripartite framework, very commonly used in many old systems. And we saw quickly how it can be applied to practical applications, mostly in the realms of martial arts, physical arts, energy arts, but eventually anything. The main thing that's to be understood there is when people in olden times used a framework like the 4 directions or the 3 levels, 3 vertical levels of the world joined by the spiritual axis, they didn't think the world was only that, or that the world was actually just resumed to these 3 elements. The endeavor of the integral frameworks is trying to make sense of everything. In trying to make sense of everything, you will have in many ways to make big and broad simplification, broad generalizations. If we get back to the numerical system that's used, you could get numerical systems going another way. So you could really get to a type of integral framework that would map one element, then one other element, then a third, a fourth, and so on, till it reached billions and billions and billions, till it reached the infinity of particular elements the world is comprised of, which, if you zoom in and out, and if you include relationships and dynamics, flows into the realm of what is, and not only small blocks of matter, then the number of things comprising any world is infinite. The number of things comprising any specific element is infinite too, especially if you include all its relationship to all other things, defining it into a field of reality. So the integral approach, going down the way of starting with the many and getting to the few, is as legitimate as the way starting from the few and trying to get to the many. But if you want to make sense of things, if you want to appropriate them personally and use them to relate to the world or to map your journey into the world, then most likely you'll use the simplifying scheme. We now use massively the complicating or complexifying scheme of mapping more and more minute parts of the world in more and more specialized smaller parts. We use it massively just because we specialize. So no individual person is able to map out the entire frame of knowledge nowadays, for instance. All theories of everything that try to include it, even 2 opposite renditions of the world forces, theoretical world forces, so far tend to fail. At least tend to fail in that they are not broadly admitted. So we are at a point where we have as many different worldviews as maybe you would have in some religious sects at different times. And there again, you have two choices. Either everybody goes his or her own way, or you try to integrate. You try to somehow reconcile or map out, clarify the commonalities that can be used to communicate and still hold community. If science is broken down into that many sects adhering to that many theoretical worldviews that are now completely removed from any potential validation by direct experience of the sensory world, then we're not far from religiosity. It's just the tools and the language we use and the logic we try to use to validate our forms of thinking might differ slightly. So you go through all the arcane language of mathematics, which would be maybe thought of as very different from ordinary language used during the debates of the scholastic era, the struggles with nominalists and who like the different schools of Christianity or later the Reformation. But still we're stuck at the same point, and we're stuck at the same point in society too. So we're trying to use an objective metric of the world to explain why all the things that we perceive individually are the right ones and are those that should be taken into account, while those that are pushed by our opponents or competitors are secondary or are delusory. And we're trying to do that in a way by piling data, piling scientific papers, piling proofs, numbers, what to try statistics, what to try to articulate as objective proofs. The matter is that the opponents are doing exactly the same, or they are in a realm of their own. So the opponents that are articulating their arguments into the framework of rational discourse, logic, and whatnot, like Aristotelian logic or statistical logic, they will have piles of studies, of specialists, of proofs, of data to counter all of the data that we can come up with. And it goes into so this point next is who's lying. If there's only one truth and someone is using arguments to prove that the one truth is his, and others are doing the same, then there cannot be two opposite truths in the common Aristotelian logic, for instance. So one of the point of view must be wrong. And then you get into the intricacies. You can have like aspects that are, you have the skills that are to be considered. So some event can manifest and be observed at one scale, disappear at another, or turn into something completely different. So you see something happening on Earth, or you see something happening right beside you. You see it with your own eyes. And then you catch the balloon, and you go up, and you froze time, and you're looking at the exact same event. Same thing is happening, but you're more and more remote from it. So you include it into wider and wider perspective. So wide angle vision. The more remote you are from it. At one point the event disappears, and the point is actually quite fast. It just becomes a tiny dot in the global bigger scale of being that you can see. So it becomes a tiny dot of a region, for instance, and then it becomes a tiny dot of a continent, and it becomes a tiny dot of a planet when your balloon turns into an extraterrestrial shuttle, and you look at the Earth from outside. So then you go away, and the Earth itself becomes a dot. It becomes insignificant. It becomes just a point, a small component, very small component of the actual real thing, which would be the solar system. And the solar system, when you go away, will disappear too, and will become a detail. And all its intricacies, all the things that are happening at the human scale, become not even nothing. They're the same as a quantum fluctuation for us. So who's right? First, we would need to define at what scale things are looked at. So someone describing his everyday life is not wrong in what he will use, the categories that will be used. Everyday categories of emotions, movements, actions, goals. And another person comes who goes the other direction and studies more in detail. So now, instead of zooming out, person is zooming in, and the events that are happening, say at the scale of human people, turn into electrochemical reactions inside the body, into all the array of neurotransmitters and the reflexes and changes in the way the nervous system is activated and whatnot. And the person will say that what's really happening is not emotions, what's really happening is not movements and whatnot, but what's really happening is what is happening at these lower scales. But then you go even lower, and now what's really happening is interactions between cells, and then soon between molecules, and then between atoms, and between particles, and between quarks, and on and on and on, between quantum fields and potentialities of being or whatnot. Is the person describing the smallest, most minute level or scale of something, is the person right? As opposed to, say, the person looking from outer space, or from at the scale of the universe, who doesn't even see the existence of what's mentioned. In the same way, when you zoom, the entire initial situation has completely disappeared. Its universe is away. It's in scales of 10, you're as far down as you were as far up. And you get absolutely no access to the first level of everyday experience. Is everyday experience and all the categories used to map it, is it wrong as compared to smaller mappings that would be right? But which smaller maps will be right? So since we've been zooming in more and more over the last couple of centuries, and the discoveries, the reality of one time is just compromised and overshadowed by the reality of the next decades. Who's right? What's the scale? How far must we go to reach to the actual point where you get to the actual reality of things? The actual reality that I'm describing here is just including scales. But now let's use something else. We're thinking in blocks of matter. So we're thinking in bricks, small material pieces. The smaller material pieces, the very name material makes no sense anymore. There's nothing we could relate to what was originally called matter when people started this endeavor. If they had found what's been found, now the scales we reach now, and the vagueness and obscurity of these scales, and if they had to use such categories to describe what they thought of as solid and dense and directly experienceable entities of matter that they could relate to their sensory experience, and they could use an open source community to share observations and experiences with. If they had to start with the vagueness and with the obscurity of the categories we use now, be them categories of observation or categories of classification and definitions, they would have dropped the entire materialist framework, the entire materialist idea. The idea of matter would have made no sense, and they would have dropped the entire scientific endeavor, like the idea of knowledge available to the reason and to the sensory experience of individuals that could be made objective and remove the subjective biases by combining many different perceptions together. So first, what we need to account for is the fact that the scales we're looking at now are out of the sensory experience of any human. So they are in the realms of infinitely small, infinitely big. They can be reached first through amplification, direct amplifications of the mechanisms our bodies are using. So say lenses would be using nearly the same techniques as the eye to gather and concentrate light. But then very fast it goes into electronics, and then it goes beyond electronics. It goes into software, it goes into AI, and now you use as a tool of perception, you use something that will detect some fluctuation into metrics that you have devised on your own in some ways. You predict fluctuations in whatever supposedly objective field, like an electric reaction to an event through sensors, and then you use this as a proof of your direct observation of something. This becomes really, really tricky. Or when you're watching something and you have what could be called a flaw in the sensory apparatus that you're using, or not in the sensory apparatus, but in the tools of treatment of information that you're using. This flaw, let's say, will make color disappear and make you colorblind. This flaw will turn your experience into a subjective one, meaning that if you're around people who all see colors, so the colors are part of their objective world. When we use objective, there's this idea that it's the world as is in the things, in the objects, and not the world as seen from the various points of view and biases of the viewer, of the subject doing the observation. But now when we get to the point when the actual tools used to access this supposed objective world, when they're flawed, you do not share commonalities of experience with others. Maybe, or you'll still share the shapes if you still have eyes. You'll still share distances and maybe some relationships of the use of black and white that you can see, or whatever color your eyes perceive. But you lost your commonality, you lost your objectivity. In objectivity there, I just mean you lost the commonality of perception with most others sharing the same tools and the same tools of interpretation, treatment of information. So now when you're using your expanded senses, any flow into the hardware, software, or use of the tool will have the same effect. It will turn what was potentially an objective reality shared by all the people using the same tools into something perceived only by the subject using these specially flawed tools. But the flawed tools, what it means, it's just that the set of parameters of the tools are different from the others. So that gets really, really problematic too. For instance, what we think of as being the world, due to mostly choices of philosophies, are building blocks. If we extend our models and consider things not as building blocks but as events or processes in the Whiteheadian idea, for instance, or if we consider them as being, we consider things in the world as being relationships or ideas, then we get yet another entirely different number and nature of elements comprising the world. So now, who's to say that the world is actually made of bricks and not made of big overall ideas? So you get back to the idea, what is the house made of? Is the house, you get back to the idea of causation explored by Aristotle, for instance. What is the actual cause? Is it the formal cause? Is it the material cause? The teleological or final cause? Is the house its use, its finality, what it's made for? Is it what it's made of? Is it how it's made? Or is it how it was planned, how it was thought, the idea behind it? And in many ways we have not gone beyond these things, especially since the very strong increase in capabilities that the material sciences offered made it look as though they had completely left philosophy and metaphysics and spirituality or religiosity in the background, because they were able to build stronger weapons. They were able to impose their way of seeing the world to all of us. If another way of understanding the world was able to beat the weapons built by the marriage of technology, craftsmanship, industry and sciences, theoretical sciences, it could impose its worldview to all of us, and it could say that it's the right one. So now you will have many oppositions to this sentence, and rightly so in many ways. But again, problem is, who's to say what is the scale? Who's to say what is the actual definition of the type of events that we're watching? Are we watching just isolated fluctuations or states of being removed from the networks and fields of and matrices of interrelationships in which they always appear? Can we isolate the brick, the building block, from the craftsmanship that allow it to be made, from the material it's made of, from the geology of the area, from all this nexus of relationship? Can we isolate it from the climate, from the workers that are actually building or assembling things together? Can we isolate it from the entire the crafts and from the what's the name? Whatever. So now we're facing wars of meaning that are basically fought on objective grounds. But when you get back deep enough, past the mutual accusations of falsifications and like biased logic and all these common arguments that are thrown at each other, when you get past that, you end up facing the idea that reality or truth, isolated truth, will be very, very hard to define if you do not define your point of view to what's good and bad, what's good for whom, at which scale. The predator in the definition of ecological relationships, the predatory relationship will be deemed plus for the predator, minus for the prey. And at the individual level, obviously, if death is bad and you're the prey, once you're eaten by the predator, you've lost. It's minus for you. If you're predator, you got satiated, you got your non-self from your surrounding milieu to build up yourself, and so it's plus for you. But now if we look at the scale of the species, the entire species, for instance, of a population in the area, and we remove the minus, we remove the predator so that the prey can live happily ever after and get all the pluses. So what do we see in this? We'll see one of the types of trophic cascades. So there, the absence of the predator will change the behavior of the prey and will increase the predation that the prey exerts on its own prey. Let's say its own prey, if it's an herbivore, will be the trees, the shrubs and vegetation of the area. And now, if all limits to the prey's population are lifted, due to the fact that we removed all the negative aspects, we removed the predators, then we removed the pathogens, we removed parasites, and say we remove competitors too. So we get into the best of the worlds for the prey. So normally it's plus, 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 plus. But what happens there? The prey destroys its environment, and the environment carries the idea of what's surrounding us. But the word milieu or medium is much better depiction of what's happening. The milieu is what we are in the middle of, and what's in the middle of ourselves. We are made of the bricks we can gather from the milieu. We are made of the air we breathe. We are made of the energy that we get from the light. We are made of the water. We are made of the nutrients. So, if we get to the idea of what a being is, and we get to our idea of individuality, something that cannot broken down, or we get to the idea of atomos, the same concept, we cannot break down further, because if you break it down further, then it doesn't doesn't exist or doesn't function anymore. So we cannot break down past this brick, this size of brick. So for organisms, individuality would stop at what cannot be cut without you losing your life, what you cannot be deprived of without losing your ability to self-maintain. So chop my head, I'm done. Get rid of my heart, my liver, get rid of many parts of my bodies, I'm done. If I'm on my own and not supported by a community, and I lose a limb, then I'm done too, most likely, in a short time. If I'm exposed to predators, losing most of the parts of myself and any of my capabilities, any of my ways of serving or fulfilling my vital needs, would suffice to kill me. Now if I'm in a big social body, if I'm a cell of a bigger body, I can be a very damaged cell and still exist, which is what we are in modern society. Most of us are broken. We would not thrive for long in nature with any type of serious predator. We are broken at many different levels. Physically, we are broken in our awareness, in our perception. We are broken in our emotions and ways of making sense of the world, ways of tracking information. So it seems to us that many of these things, our bodies, our organs, we can replace them, we can get rid of them. We use them, we abuse them, we wear them out, and then we can use some of the functions, the constructs of the overall superorganism of societies to fix us, replace us. And we're dreaming of building new bodies, being downloaded into fridges and sent in space. The only problem there is that we get this impression that we are not the things we can get rid of. And in some ways, when you get to other scales, it would be very, very true. But also, you would need to define exactly the level at which you're speaking. I am not my body. This is an absolute truth. If I look at myself as flows of matter, energy, and information, most likely nothing or very little remains of the cells of the matter that made me when I was 6 years old. If things remained at this time, they would be a minority compared to all the things that were added up later. So who's the original population of matter that makes up the oil country? Same. Is there any objective way of choosing? It's the matter. If you have to choose, it's not objective. Is there any objective thing that will tell you that at such or such percentage of population you are your identity, and then if you are made scanned by the new arrivals, then at one point you're not your identity anymore. So we see that in politics all the time. You see new energies, new populations arriving into a country, and the country may have defined its identity in relation to a type of population it had. When you zoom in, you'll see that this population was very different in the past. The European populations that migrated to France in the past, for instance, Italians and Spaniards and people from the colonies, or people coming from poor regions to try to benefit from the economic activity and wealth of an area, ended up making up the population of what you later identify as, say, the country of origin of such and such. So you have France. And then you wait more and new populations are arriving, and the mix is changed again. And maybe the scale, like the number of new arrivals compared to the number of old cells remaining, will change completely the distribution. And at which point do you decide that you are not the same country, that you are not the same identity? So what will make you able to decide are metrics of value. So what will make you decide that at this point it's too much and at this point it's not? It's just a measure of value. Numerical value, quantitative values, and qualitative values, relative values. And these values are subjective. They are dependent on interpretations, narratives, appreciations of the people who are expressing them or incarnating. There's no way to solve logically the debates we're having now in society. If I take a very simple instance, you'll get the idea of if I used that with a friend not long ago. So say a very small debate, very, very minute measure. So you slow down the traffic on the roads from 90 kilometers per hour on the national roads to 80. And you present data to show that it will diminish the pollution, it will diminish the cost of travels, it will diminish the risks of accidents and so on. Increase security, be good for the planet, everything. Now you're using objective metrics, you're using sciences, you're using data from specialists, you can display it using graphs and whatnot. And now people will come in front with counter arguments. So say you'd have people looking at the network of roads as a flow system, and they will tell you that since the lifestyle and the estate industry isolates or like puts the workers away from their work, they have to commute, they have to go back and forth. Since the way of organizing work puts everybody on the road nearly at the same time, so you will have to bring all the workers you brought to the areas of work, you will have to bring them out at the time, so pretty much the same time when they leave. So now you have distances, and you have say a cumulative amount of distances that must be crossed. So these distances will be crossed in a time, and the time will be dependent on the speed first. So you have whatever numbers of cars to move back, and you have a limited infrastructure. You bring more cars, you have more pressure in your pipes, and normally the way to solve that would be to get a stronger venturi effect. The pressure will be released by accelerating. But now you've capped the maximum speed, and say that at any point in your network of circulation you have something slowing down, so you have a congestion of some type. So now your cars can go only through one lane. Since they cannot go faster, they will congest more and more. Even without any congestion, if you slow down your traffic, you will make the trip back slower, so you will extend the time spent to move back. And since most people will leave at the same time due to the organization of work, you will create congestions. So all these things you could find them in some metrics of economic policies or fluid dynamics and whatnot. And so you have other people bringing other expertise and counter-argumenting some of the first arguments that were proposed by people. And then you'll get other arguments that are not based on say the science, but you'll get arguments from people who are poor, have to live far away, have to commute to work, and find themselves spending say 10, 15, 20 minutes more both ways to get to where they want. And they'll tell you that it's like a cost of nearly 1 hour of their lives every day due to this measure. So now, who's right? Who's objectively right? There's no way to determine, because it depends entirely on the set of values and priorities you put to the front. If you put safety and pollution first, on a simple basic situation, then the 80 kilometers per hour will be better. But if you get to pollution caused by the congestions of traffic, then maybe the figures would reverse. And if you include psychological health of people, making them drive faster once they there's a release of the slowdown of traffic or of a traffic jam, then maybe you get more chance accidents. So how do we decide things that are mostly modeled out of theories? We take measures through things that are modeled from reality. They're not actual observations of long-term things happening in reality, because there you would have to change your measures according to all the matrices of conditions that are changing in the area. The geography, the weather, the lifestyle, many things would get into account, and your models would become too complicated to be unified. You would not be able to make one common measure for an entire area, far less for an entire country. So what makes us decide is actually subjective values. And these subjective values come from memories, they come from education, the past, and they come from relationships that we've established with such or such aspects of the world. So for me, for instance, if cars could stop now entirely and destroy the fabric of everyday society and save newts crossing the roads or whatnot, I would deem it fairly good news. Although right now I'm not able to walk as I used to, so maybe it would backfire on me. But for most people, I do strongly understand that they would strongly resent if I could impose my views on them, and rightly so. If we have no way of integrating, and integrating does not mean leveling and uniformizing and homogenizing our views, but we need a way to map them on the same types of maps. We can have many different maps in an integrative framework or integral framework. You can use all these ideas of GIS, so geographical information systems, where you can overlay different specialized maps carrying specialized information. So the very common idea would, you relate the 5 elements to maps, and you get a map of the water in area, you get a map of the earth, like the landscapes, whatnot, the soils, geology, you get a map of the air, the winds, the climate, you get a map of life, the populations, the beings, the species. You get a map of fire, the energies, the heat, light, and you decide which ones you overlay together. You can decide what's the degree of transparency, so that you can get more of one or more of the other. And in this way, you can articulate together maps that are based on different subjects. But this is a very small and in many ways very flawed instance of integral mapping, because your maps can be much so that you can overlay the maps. They need to use the same scales, they need to use the same projection, so translation of 3D into into bidimensional planes. They need to use the same senses, same priorities. What do you put on the map? So when we get to more diversity, you'll get cultures that use things that we would call maps. But the category of map does not cover what's meant by the words that we translate in maps. So we could say that the song lines of the Aboriginals are types of vocal maps. But it's wrong. It's right in a small frame, and it's wrong if we go into the details. In the details, the entire ideas behind do not correspond at all to the ideas we use when we think about maps. It is a completely different world, and the same would go for many types of maps. And the same would apply to many types of models. When we think about old cultures as deficient in their objective take on the world because they depicted, say, the universe from a geocentric point of view, all the mental framework we put behind our idea and our comparison is wrong. It is what some people call a temporal colonialism. You apply the ideas of the time backwards to completely different cultures, where all the categories that you're using, they were not invented, or they barely existed, or they were not prevalent, or were not thought of the same way as they are now. So getting the idea that people in the past describing 5 elements thought that the world was made of 5 elements in the way we think now in chemistry, that molecules are made of elements, or like objects are made of atoms, molecules, elements. This is all wrong. And all wrong again will be part of it, would be what you'd call true, but a lot of the background ideas that would give meaning, semantic fields and fields of application that give meaning to the words used, to the categories we use to map the world and think about it, all these things were different. They do not overlay easily. You have to translate them. And when you translate, you need to remember the famous proverb, traducere è to translate is to betray. So I'm losing the original quote. Matters little. So it's a pun on the traducere and the word for treason. In French, it's traduire, c'est trahir. I lost the quote in Italian. So now back to the integral. Integral frameworks are like strongly attacked for many good reasons. systematization of integral frameworks, like what can be seen in Ken Wilber's work, for instance, is seen by many as overreaching. You think too big, and then you're not able to deliver. And same, since it's a type of subjective mapping of the world, many people will argue using the scientific method point of view, which is a whole other subject that can be broken down into many arguments and counter arguments. But they will say that it's not science-based, it's not experience-based. But then, if you understand better, most of the big analogical systems are systems of interpretation. If we translate them into categories that make sense for us. So we will say, to give modern values to them, I can use the argument that they are not meant to be objective depictions of the world, but that they are meant to be subjective interpretative frameworks. So if my argument is taken into account, then it will mean that in the same way poetry is not meant to be literal, is not meant to be read in an objective way, the use of I Ching or astrology or any of the old cosmological numerical systems or scale of beings or sacred writings are not in any way made to be objective depictions of facts, or of material facts, but they are made to be subjective frameworks of interpretation that will open up new ways of thinking about the world, new ways of you use the I Ching or the tarot and you get a reading, and this idea of a reading brings right away the idea of interpretation. You get a new lens by applying different filters. These filters you can think of as being a sort of random computation or random combination. Things appear and you look at your situation through these lenses, and they are like questions that will bring new awareness, and these aspects of awareness can bring you to do or other things. So now I can articulate this argument, and right away I can also say that it's dead wrong. Once again, what's right? What's true? What's not? Where's the limit? It's dead wrong because when I'm trying to salvage the old ways of thinking in which I find deep value, I try to salvage them by using the same categories that are used now and trying to translate it into words that would make sense for modern day people, especially trying to make sense for the people holding authority, say scientific authority. So when I do that, I'm actually twisting and bending in many ways the categories that were used in the language and in the thinking and in the living. The strong demarcation between objective and subjective is a theoretical construct. It's in many ways it's a philosophical choice of seeing the world, where you have no way of deciding from what you perceive what's real and what's objective and what's not. You have no way because you're in the middle of it. You're not out of it. So our ways of validating our perceptions are coherence, so repeated events, repeated patterns, memory, and cross-examination with other subjective perceptions and memories. So we have all these ways of trying to be sure that what we see is real, but it could be logically proved using the same types of logic that are used to prove scientific facts. It can be proven logically that I could be born every second and be downloaded all these illusory memories that would make sense of the world. I would have no way of differentiating it. I am inside my perception. What the objective I see of the world will always go through the subjective perception. It will always go through my senses, through my interpretation, my categorization, my coherence, reframing of things. I have no access to the world as it is, at a scale. And still, I can create with others a space of shared categories and perceptions of the world that I will call objective. This objective world is not shared by beings that do not partake in the same sensorium, for instance, do not have the same type of senses. The entire depiction of our world with perspectives and scales and whatnot is massively based on sight. If you think that for the longest time in the history of life, sight as such did not exist, or it existed just as a more general interaction with light, waves of light, but same, all these are constructs. So in many ways the entire way of seeing the world is restricted to all the types of organisms that existed past the advent of sight. Prior to that, you have a way of feeling, of smelling the world. You have a way of perceiving via all the tropisms that we see in chemotropism and the weird senses that we see in bacteria and things like this, and that have not really been elucidated. Or you get to the senses of particles, which just perceive fields or attraction, repulsion, and these are the translations of what we see into categories of our own theories. So this is the relativistic framework. In the relativistic framework, it's nigh impossible to prove anything. You have no solid ground. And this relativistic framework is in some ways entirely true. Now, what's entirely true too is that you have a commonality of perception over the time of your perceived life, over the time of the lives of the people around you, of the beings around you. You share, at least in the way you can perceive it, you share a world. You make world together. You move in the same spaces, you share the time, although you live at different scales and all that. And so the objectivist point of view will be true in very much the same way as the relativistic point of view is true. And the idealistic point of view will be true too, because it will a bit the idealistic or the mentalist or the cognitive point of view, which sees consciousness as prevalent. All things that do exist in this world exist in this common unified field of information that we can call consciousness, that with which we know. Anything that knows anything of this universe shares the experience of this knowing, of its coming into what we call consciousness. So again, who's to decide? If we make no diplomacy of ideas, if we do not go into communication between ways of thinking, ways of perceiving, if we do not try to find commonalities, to create bridges, translations, to create common maps, while keeping the awareness of the very deep differences between individuals, between languages, between cultures, between societies, between times. If we do not do that, we will live, and we do live in many ways, in a world of isolated specks, of bubbles. We already in many ways live and have always lived in some ways in multiverses. We may share the objective background in many aspects of it at least, but since we infer meanings that are widely different, we live in different worlds. The universe ends when any individual perception ends. We see it as ending with death, but in many ways we die to ourselves many times over before. We lose all our matter, or most of our matter. We renew it with new things from our foods, from our milieu, from all the surrounding that fills us. We create new beings at all the things that we leave behind, that are recycled into new lives, and we do the same for our energies and informations. Most of the memories that have gone through us have disappeared. I do not deeply remember how I thought, what I saw when I was 5, 6, 10, 11, or even the week before sometimes. So the structure of identity that I call me, and the structure of alterity that I call the other, the outside, is also a memory that is changing. It's not stable. And So it's relative, and it's objective, and it's subjective, and it's interobjective, intersubjective, interrelative, and so on and so forth. If you want more and more definition, you zoom in and you break it down into more. If you want less, you zoom out, and the borders between things disappear into generality. So the integral striving is not a replacement, that cannot be a replacement of other ways of seeing the world, but it can and it should be a way to allow for conversation translation. This is completely biased. I have a background as a traveler by nature. It's learning languages, discovering people, cultures, diving into the unknown comes easily for me. So it seems obvious to look for the commonalities so that you can establish a base of communication, of common help. And it's very fast. As a traveler, you have the choice of being the foreign element that will be tracked down and eradicated, or to be the source of information, of stories, of new experiences that will be welcomed and included, even for a limited time. It will be shown hospitality. So from my life experience, it's obvious that the sort of reduction of the world that is sort of coming with the necessary reduction of the mondialist framework. This re-identification, relocalization can be shrinking into the awareness and consciousness and perception, or it can be a rebalancing, rerouting, reconnecting to places, times, communities, while at the same time maintaining broad-viewed awareness. So the common saying of the altermondialist time, especially in the permaculture communities, which was act local, think global. This is a way of balancing the perspectives on the world. It is a way also to make the farmer that has lived his entire life on a piece of land and dug deep roots, the farmer, or even more for the native who lives off the land and does not only change or exploit the land. And I don't mean it in a demeaning way, but say someone who really depends on a relationship to the ground, the beings, the climate. Someone who is off his land cannot talk to people who are world travelers or space travelers if you do not find like translators, diplomats, interprets. So the integral framework is the idea of putting a layer of practices, a layer of awareness of how we can translate everything into it, everything else, without leveling the ground, without erasing the differences, without betraying the actual content, the way the universalist like world trade and mondialism has. So it was a world expansion, but the world expansion of one view, one lifestyle, one culture, one language, and the disappearance and destruction and marginalization of all others. At the same time, through this process, this one dominant Western culture and American consumerist culture was brought into contact with many pieces that deeply impacted it. Even the pieces that it destroyed and swallowed while doing its conquest and like invading its territory, they wove deep strands of stories inside the unconscious, but also inside the consciousness. So that will be it, I guess, for this of a dive into the integral, where now I'm trying to articulate integrality as it appears from its opposites. What is the world if there is no integration? What is a society if there's no, inclusion of otherness, other species, other people? So we have mass migrations coming. What will the Western world do? You have several choices. You can try to eradicate, exterminate all the people who will try to flee the conditions. It could go many ways too, because the Western world is crumbling right now on its basis. It's as most empires, it has extended its supply lines way too far, and used its domination to provide wealth to its ruling class, while destroying the very base of its power. So now it could well be that Europeans will have to flee to find shelter in Africa, where for economic reasons or for political reasons, and maybe we'll get our lesson in empathy when we get back to where the others were for us in our countries. However these things go, when you get in times of crisis, the idea of survival depends on the ability to face threats and solve the problems of providing for your survival needs. And part of doing so is providing for your vital functions. the first threat if you're on a beach stranded with your boat burning in the distance and all the stray materials brought by the tides on the beach with all the survivors. You can survive if you do not kill each other on the beach for the few objects that you deem sources of potential survival later. If you kill the others, you will lose all their capabilities, you will lose the added experiences, added points of view, added toolboxes, added workforce. If you end up alone, your survival is limited to your lifespan. Could be fun to be the king of the hill, but no one would be there to see you. So the global ideas, the world is woven together via waves of diversification reuniting into bigger social or endo-symbiotic wholes, into mediums. These wholes, these hollands, work through all the gamut, all the array, all the spectrum of relationships, including all that we deem negative relationships, conflicts, like fights, competitions, predation, whatnot. The articulation of all these relationships, it is what allows for the expansion of life on all scales. And this expansion of life and diversification allows for the weaving of complex systems with many regulating mechanisms to avoid runaway loopholes. At the same time, the entire fabric is not meant to be in balance. What's depicted sometimes in alternative movements, when you try to impose the permaculture paradise, for instance, my question was, what happens the next day? You've turned the world into this ecological paradise, and then what? What will happen the day after? Will time freeze and history end the same way it did when capitalism supposedly took over the world? New capitalism, or however we can call this. A game of life is not even the material game of life, and without going into the energy or the emotional or the spiritual or the social. The game of life is not made to end in a stalemate. It's ever exploring, ever increasing, ever changing, until death. And death is another cycle of disintegration to make room for new combinations, new things, new potentialities. Our attempts at predicting, pre-mapping future presents, or pre-organizing the present so that it can be planned in advance, erasing all the flowing aspect, all the moving aspect, all the emergence of the unknown, of the creativity in the now. All these aspects are ways to try to secure our perceived brokenness, our hurt, our fears, that are based on layers of filters that we piled on top of our essence. And these filters, they do have meanings, they have functions, they made us survive and whatnot. But at the same time, they're completely trapping us in a very, very small definition of what we are individually or what we are collectively. If we get stuck into smaller and smaller definitions, the chances of survival individually or collectively become quite slim for humanity, but for the rest also. Massive wars between all the different people at whatever scale, be it locally with just bands marching against each other with whatever they find at hand, or be it at a larger scale with the drone attacks and the AI warfare and cyber attacks blocking the very specialized electronic and computerized systems that we use to supply our world, or using nuclear bombs, using CRISPR-Cas9 to create new viruses or whatnot. All these things, it does not matter the scale. If we do not want war of all against all, we have to find ways to communicate, to create commonalities, to understand each other. To understand each other, we have to make the effort to try to generate a vague translation of other cultures, other individualities, other societies, other species, other ways of being and seeing and understanding the world into our own. And this endeavor is part of the integral aspect. So an integral system like Ken Wilber's systems, that would be the only integral, that would deem itself the only integral way, which was not at all Ken Wilber's take when he started his work, at least. Now, I do not know the guy personally, so I couldn't say. And for sure, by repetition, by followers, and by the fact that the system integrates things that are helpful for people practicing certain types of exploring certain avenues of life, due to the efficiency in some way of the system and its simplicity, it can spread and it can become a sort of common currency. In this way, it becomes quite poor. It's like, because basically, if you look at Ken Wilber's system, the ECOL, for instance, is a modeling of human beings that's very, very close to what you find in role-playing games. I've played role-playing games all my youth and teenage years, started at 5 or so. So the modeling of a rendition of what a human being or what other beings are, and in scales or in metrics, and the mapping of how it evolves through experiences, through time, through like wounds or whatnot, is a very common experience of the gaming, role-playing gaming experience of tabletop role plays at the time. So the mapping of the categories that Wilber uses are integrating different fields for a purpose. And the purpose initially is the expansion of consciousness. So it's linked deeply to his own life experience and his own interest into Zen Buddhism and spirituality and the likes, while integrating his own practices of, say, bodybuilding as a cross training of diverse philosophy and rational thinking as a complementary aspect of this. And these integrations are helpful. They are, for, like, I do train. So my take was more from the traveling the wild places or traveling alone aspects, but you do need to become a jack of all trades, and the broad aspects of life that at one point you need to not master, but at least explore and understand at least a bit, to be able to survive on your own in other countries, other cultures, other ecosystems, will include all the categories of like states of consciousness, states of awareness, states of awakening, even in the very basic meaning of the word, connection, and then all the physical practices, movement practices, carrying stuff, whatnot, all the energy practices, vitality, breathing, dealing with cold, heat, then all the emotional practices, dealing with fear, dealing with loneliness, dealing with anything, and all the mental, like all mental being the broad category of treatment of information. So in mental I would put perception, and then later interpretation, thinking, narratives, all this modeling, all planning, strategizing, designing. So you need these, and at the same time you need other things as the psychic, say maybe the intuition, the immersion into the flow, into the moving without analyzing, or at least with a strata of your psyche not being immersed entirely while another one can be analyzing. And you need the social aspects, you need the technical aspects, so using externalization and ways of expanding your capabilities. You need the psychic, the communication, the horizontal communication between things that are at more or less the same scale, and the communication, so it's commonalities that are beyond the usual transmission of information. So it could go from deep empathy to resonance to all sorts of psi phenomenon, and the spiritual being the states of consciousness, the felt definition of self. There's and also communication between scales, so what we would call vertical communications. You need all these in some measure. So spiritual would also relate to, if linked to the mental, it's putting what's more important on top, prioritizing your life, making sense making, meaning making. So to survive, you need to develop all these, or to simplify in 3 categories, you will need your body, your mind, and your spirit, or your body, your heart, energy, and mind, spirit. However you fragment or model the thing, and you need to see how they can be woven together. Because if you need to learn each time a new thing without applying anything of what you learned prior, if all the gains you got from your physical training are lost when you lose one limb to injuries or to wear and tear, and you cannot reapply what you got to other fields, and you'll spend a long time learning. So this learning how to learn too would also be a part of the integral. So that's it for now.